Hey Al, it's your girl Erin, and today I wanted to talk about why I think anarchists should be endorsing Bernie Sanders for president. So, if we're going to ask the question of whether anarchists should actually be caring about elections at all and that kind of thing, I think they should. But before you can even get to that, I think you need to look at the time scales involved in things like building anarchism. So, I've been talking a lot about building this cooperative economy where you are helping each other based on mutual aid instead of doing things transactionally. And that allows you to meet people's needs directly, responding to needs on a kind of supply and demand fashion, but without there being a payment or an exchange. You're just giving over to the person who has a need because they need it, and when you have a need, someone does that for you because you're in union together. You've collectivized, and that kind of cooperative economy is required, in my opinion, if you are going to establish anarchism. So, that type of economy isn't something that you can build overnight. It's something that, you know, normally people would consider having to take over the government to be able to have a say over like hundreds of different industries and thousands of different corporations and whatever, and they try to leverage power that way. But because we're trying to build something that can survive without a state, because of the way states always end up producing inequality, which ends up producing all kinds of nonsense. So if we don't want inequality, we can't have a state and we can't have hierarchy, and we need to build something that can survive without a state. And so we've got to build that economy and get it to that scale without having leverage of like top-down governments. It's got to be bottom-up. It's got to be people using their own productive forces, their own labor, any extra productive energy you have in you, any access to any means of production you have, organizing together, collaborating, building that economy together. And then when you have that economy, then you can start talking about stuff like having a revolution and trying to switch over everyone onto this new economy. So you'll have proved that it can work to people, and that's why it would be ethical in you to say to them, ditch capitalism, which is less ethical, etc. You don't want to force people into your new system, because if you try to force them into it, then they're not going to have that good faith, collaborative nature that allows you to not have a state. So, building that kind of economy, getting that kind of collectivization is really difficult, and I think it would take you decades to get going from scratch. And if you don't know of any of that type of stuff getting built around you right now, then you have to consider that you might be the one that has to start it from scratch. And so, because we don't really know of any big movements like that, we have to assume it's still at that kind of germinating stage. It hasn't started growing yet. And so it's going to take maybe at least 10 years, if not 20, for that kind of economy to get big enough that you can start talking about ditching capitalism and the state. And so until then, what are you going to do? Because potentially in the USA, like if Trump got elected, then things might get bad so quickly that, and they may start trying to actually arrest and lock people up or kill people just for being leftists. And then it's going to be pretty much impossible to build that economy at all. Yes, you might still have some form of it happening, and you might be trying to organize a resistance, but you're not going to be able to get it big enough on a big enough scale where you can actually say to your society, look, let's move to this system. So what the best you can hope for is to overthrow the fascist state and put some kind of other state in place. And what state should you put in place? Probably a social democracy, because you don't want to have it be way too authoritarian and thereby cause there to be counter-revolutionary movements, thereby cause there to be material reasons for people to oppose the state. And you don't want to just go down the super capitalist, let the business sort it out, because they will always end up doing things in the needs of profit more than people. So you got to try and have some regulations on capitalism without going super authoritarian. That way you can still try attempting to achieve social justice. Now, you won't actually be able to achieve it until you move away from capitalism. But you can't move away from capitalism until you've got that alternate economy built, right? So the primary concern, I think, needs to be what is going to be best for that building of that cooperative economy. Because if that is the bottleneck, if that is the thing that is stopping us from being able to move over from capitalism, then we're just going to be stuck in more capitalism. So what is going to be the best for building that? Now, if you had a socialist authoritarian, like trying to, okay, let's say state capitalists, they call themselves socialists, but they're doing capitalism, but the state is in control of the industries and everything, try and make things equitable. Now, they would generally fail at that because it's not something you really can do top down, and so there's always going to be problems in trying to do it. But let's say they are doing that. If you're trying to build this independent economy, you are basically saying to them that you don't trust them to be able to distribute to you. And because they aren't doing it under the guise of capitalism, they're trying to solve the problem themselves, that is a form of criticism against them. Trying to form self-governance, autonomy, and mutual aid in that is a threat to them, because they've said that rather than having that, you need to have them. And so it's a direct ideological attack against them. And so they are going to want to suppress decentralization. They're going to want to suppress anything that pulls power from the state down to the people, because they have promised people that the state having the power is what's needed to solve things. And so you're criticizing the core value of their ideology is that they need to take that power to fix things, and you're saying we'll fix it without you doing that. So in a social democracy, there is, although you won't ever achieve true liberation and true empowerment, there is stuff like unionization being promoted, worker co-ops get promoted, and people can start to build that, like community initiatives, like maybe your food gardens and that can start getting some federal funding and stuff like that. You can push for that kinds of things. You're more likely to have judges ruling, based not on prejudice but on fairness, because there's a political pressure to try and achieve justice and try and still allow people the agency to make their own choices and to do their own thing, which is kind of why they let you build these things. And these things that you're doing look good to them. They look like worker co-ops, they look like unionizations, and they are. What they are trying to do is make themselves immune from capitalism, and that is only a threat to social democracies when it gets big enough for you to start talking about moving over anyway. But on its own, just starting out, it's not really a threat to them, because to them it's more like you taking the work off their hands. And only when you got to a big scale would they start to wonder if you're an ideological threat to them. But by then, at least you don't have death squads after you. And yes, they may still try to come down on you, but then in doing so, they out themselves as no longer being in favor of those values. And then you have more chance of being able to radicalize people anyway. So it's not exactly a loss anyway if they end up seeing you as a threat, but it lets it become something big enough to at least have a chance at growing even after being outed. So yeah, I would say if you look at the policies of any of the candidates, Bernie Sanders is offering the most of those principles, the most decentralization of power. He even wants to promote people generating solar on their own homes to decentralize power supply so that it's better for handling out. That's going to be all, but for the reasons I mentioned above is why I think anarchists should be trying to help Bernie. Let it be something you do on the side. Let your main thing be that economy. So yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.